Retreat Center. About 5 years ago, I stayed for 2 weeks at a retreat center in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The idea of my trip was to get away from my stressful job, disconnect from technology, and do a bit of the cliché soul-searching you see in movies like Eat, Pray, Love. Northern Michigan is the perfect place for self-reflection. Thick pine forest and quiet lakes blanket the area. You can go months without seeing another person if you really want. So, in November of 2018, I scheduled my vacation at a quiet retreat center in the Hiawatha National Forest. When I arrived at the lodge, I was happy to see so few cars in the lot. I had decided to book come in November specifically for the off-season rate and experience. I checked in at the main office and was shown to my little cabin set back a couple hundred yards from the main lodge, half hidden by some pine trees. The cabin had no bathroom or kitchen, as those facilities were held in the main lodge. There was a small wood stove, a twin bed, a small dresser, a desk and chair, and a battery-powered lantern for a light. The cabin could fit 2 people at most, but it had a small porch off the front with a nice view of the lake. Quickly settled in and found that I could make coffee in an old-school percolator on the wood stove. Within a couple days, I had a routine of getting up before the sunrise to make coffee and watch the daybreak over the lake. It was heaven. There were about 5 other people at the lodge, all of them on their own to get away like I had. We talked during meals, but there was no obligation to socialize outside of that. Being an introvert, it was like my dream had come true. I got along with the others just fine. 3 of the 5 of them were older men, probably in their 50s. There was one young man in his 30s, apparently a tech guy who started his own software company and was now enjoying some time away from it all. There was one other woman there. Her name was Carrie, and she appeared to be in her 40s. She talked a lot, and within the first 2 days, I basically knew her life story. Her 17-year-old daughter had passed away from a heroin overdose just 2 years ago, and as a former drug user herself, had recently began a healing journey. She dressed a little ratty and didn't appear as well kept as the other people staying at the retreat center, but she was nice enough, although a little hard to shake off sometimes. Occasionally, Carrie would try to follow me on one of my hikes. I had let her come along one time, but she didn't stop talking for the entire time we were out there. The stories she was telling were a little disturbing, and I found myself feeling uneasy around her in the middle of nowhere like that. Every few minutes she would try to give some reason why we had to turn back and go to the lodge. Eventually, I gave in, cut the planned hike short, and returned to the lodge. We parted ways, and I didn't go on any more hikes together. Then one day I showed up for lunch and Carrie wasn't there. She hadn't told us she was leaving. In fact, we hadn't ever really gotten a straight answer when we asked how long she was planning to stay. The atmosphere was a lot less tense now that she had left, and after a few days, I had completely forgotten about her. I was enjoying spending the days hiking and the nights reading by my wood stove. The highlight of the facilities was my regular trip to the retreat center's sauna. The sauna was a small shack about a quarter-mile hike from the main area of the retreat center. It sat on the edge of the lake and secluded enough so that if you wanted to, you could take a sauna and a swim in the nude. At first I had been uneasy about that, even though I would go during the time allocated for women and was always alone. But by the middle of my second week at the lodge, I was enjoying the freedom. The weather was starting to get cold, and by the 3rd week of my trip, just before Thanksgiving, there was a dusting of snow on the ground every morning. I continued my sauna trips despite the cold and found that I could withstand the lake water even as the weather got chillier. It was my second to last night before leaving the retreat center. I had just finished my longest hike yet, 10 miles in one day, and was looking forward to using the sauna after dinner. I went to the main lodge at 6:30 to grab my supper and catch up with the other members. I sat down at the table and immediately noticed that the mood of the conversation was tense and confused. Apparently, the guy that ran the tech company swore he saw Carrie while he was fishing on the lake before dinner. I was clear across the other side of the lake, and I looked up to see a woman standing on shore about 40 feet away. He was frantic and uncomfortable while he relayed the story. She was just standing there, staring at me, he said with an air of confusion. It shocked me, and I didn't recognize her at first, but when I did, I put my hand up and waved. What did she do then? One of the men asked. That's where it gets really weird. She didn't wave back. She just turned and sprinted into the woods. I mean, like just took off. The guy was really freaked out by what he had seen. That's scary. What do you think she was doing out there? I asked. I remember she mentioned once that she was from the area. Maybe she was out on a run and didn't notice you. Another of the guests said. Yeah, that would make sense. Someone else agreed. Still, it gave me a creepy feeling. The tech guy responded. He was looking anxious, like he expected her to just show up in the cafeteria staring at us all from a distance. Dinner went on and we switched topics, but you could tell everyone was feeling a little uneasy after the story about Carrie. Eventually, it left my mind, and I went to my cabin to gather my stuff for the sauna. I proceeded along the path around the lake until I reached the little green shack on the lake's edge. It was dusk, but the path was lined with lights, so you didn't get lost on your walk back. I went inside, and it was already warm. It being so close to my departure from the retreat center, I was looking forward to one last night of sweating and swimming in the brisk water, and that is exactly what I did. The final time I stepped out of the sauna with the intention of jumping in the lake, I noticed it had started snowing. Just a soft and silent sprinkle of large snowflakes coming down from the black sky. I took my last swim in the beautiful snowy night and returned to the sauna to dry off and head back to my cabin. I started my walk back. If you have ever spent an hour or two jumping between a sauna and a cold lake, you'll know the feeling of how your legs turn to jello and you feel absolutely euphoric afterwards. I was a few yards up the path, lost in thought and enjoying the brisk air, when I heard rustling behind me. I jumped a little bit because it surprised me, but wrote it off as a gust of wind or a squirrel and kept moving. After another minute, the rustling got louder and a little bit closer. I picked up my pace. The back of my neck was tingling, and my breath became fast. There is nothing like thinking someone or something is following you when you are alone in the woods, especially at night. It's just a deer, I told myself. I put my head down and walked deliberately. I probably only had another 5 minutes of walking, but that was a long time in the cold, dark night. Then, something happened that made my heart almost burst. In the quiet of the night, the crashing sound changed to clear and measured footsteps. Someone was on the path behind me. I wanted to look back, but I didn't dare. I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and trudged faster toward the main room of the cabin. The footsteps matched my pace. My senses were on fire. I didn't notice the cold or the wind pick up as I started to round the last turn in the trail. I wanted to break out in a run, but at the same time I didn't want to let whoever was following me know I was aware. I wanted to play it cool and head straight to my cabin, lock the door, and get the can of bear spray my father had made me pack. Thoughts started swirling around my head. Who was following me? Was it a stranger or someone from the retreat center? How long had they been watching me? Had they been spying on me at the sauna? The thought of some strange man watching me on my nighttime swim made my stomach lurch and my vision blur with fear, anger, and disgust. My body was numb from the combination of fear and endorphins. I tried to subtly to walk faster, but I was almost at a jog. The padding of the footsteps behind me grew a little louder and faster. Then I saw the lights on in the main lodge. I was almost back, and now I was in earshot if I needed to scream. As finally got closer to the lodge, I noticed people in the window. That's when I remembered that sometimes people stay in the main lodge and light a fire in the fireplace in the evening. I made a last-second decision to avoid my cabin and head to the lodge. I turned fast as ran up the path to the main building. Without looking back, I jogged up the steps, flung open the door, and got myself safely inside. I closed the door tightly behind me and looked out the window to see if anyone was out there. At the edge of the light, just for a split second, I swore I saw the figure of a woman spring away into the woods. My heart was still pounding. I wasn't even aware that all the guests as well as the night staff were in the lodge watching what had just happened. "Are you okay? What happened?" I heard 3 people ask me at once. Someone grabbed my bag from my shoulder and led me to one of the armchairs by the fire. I had to catch my breath. Someone was following me back from the sauna. I said quietly. The adrenaline was finally starting to leave my body. My heartbeat and breathing were getting more even. Someone ran over to the door I had just come through and locked it. Then 2 others pushed a table against it. "What's going on?" I asked. Someone spotted Carrie again. The one of the staff saw her standing on the edge of the road as they were driving home. Apparently, she darted across the street in front of their car and into the foods on the edge of the retreat center's property, said one of the older guests. He was standing there with a stern look and his arms crossed while staring at the door. "They called the lodge and the main office just had us all gather here. We were about to go out and find you when you came running in." The younger of the men said, Why are we all barricaded in here?" I asked. My adrenaline was starting to rise again. It turns out that Carrie was never a guest at all. She was actually employed by the lodge as a term of her parole. She didn't leave because her stay was over. She left because she was fired. We all discussed the possible backstories of Carrie. The staff that were barricaded inside the lodge with us said that she was a local woman, but that they didn't know her personally. She had started working at the retreat center a few months prior and would get free meals as part of her offer, which was why she was always there at mealtime. According to the staff, they didn't know why she had been fired and barred from the property. When someone called in that they saw her and mentioned her weird behavior, the manager told the staff to gather all the guests in the lodge. After hearing this, we were all pretty scared to go back to our cabins, especially after I told them how I had been followed back from the sauna. The lodge manager called the police to do a thorough search of the property, but we all elected to sleep by the fireplace in the safety of the lodge that night. After breakfast the next morning, we returned to our cabins feeling a little safer in the light of day. The manager of the center escorted me back to mine as I was the only woman and had reported being followed the night before. When we arrived at my cabin, I was thankful he had accompanied me. As we approached, I saw that my door was wide open. We looked at each other and kept walking. As we got closer, I noticed that my suitcase and all its contents had been thrown out onto the wet ground. The window of the cabin was broken from the outside. I had locked the cabin door, so that would have been how Carrie got in. Inside of the cabin, the bedding was torn apart and the furniture tipped over. In the middle of it all lay Carrie. The manager took a moment to take a photo with his phone as quietly as possible so as not to wake her if she was even still alive. Then we rushed back to safety and called the police. The guests and staff were all called back to the main lodge to sit behind the safety of the locked door while we awaited word from the police. Several hours later, after giving detailed reports to the officers, we were finally released. We were given no information, but were told that an investigation had been opened and if needed, we would be called for testimony in court. I decided to leave the lodge that afternoon. I returned to my cabin, threw what was salvageable into my suitcase, and left the retreat center forever. I remember looking in the back seat of my car before I got in, just in case she had somehow managed to hide there. I avoided looking at the forest's edge until I was well away. About a month later, I got a call from the manager of the station. He said he wanted to update me on what had happened, if I was willing to listen. Prior to the event, Carrie had recently been released from a drug treatment center after receiving 2 years of treatment for heroin and methamphetamine use. After her daughter had died, she was arrested for assault, but instead of sending her to jail, they had sent her for rehabilitation. The owner of the retreat center was friends with the judge in town, and as a term of Carrie's release, she was to be employed by the lodge as a custodian. She was doing okay for a while, but she had been written up 3 times for going through people's belongings and had been caught stealing the master key for the lodge and cabins. By stealing the keys, she had broken the terms of her employment and thus her parole. She was set to be fired the following day and would face an actual jail sentence or at least time in a mental health facility, but she failed to show up to work. It turns out that she had also failed to show up to her meeting with her parole officer that week. The night she followed me back from the sauna, everyone had been looking for her. When the staff member called in a sighting, the manager was alarmed by her behavior and immediately called the police. The initial search found nothing. At the time, the police and the manager agreed it was best not to tell me, but when they had gone through the security camera footage for that night, they confirmed it was her that followed me out of the woods. They were able to capture an image of her, only about 15 feet behind me, carrying a large hunting knife. I got chills down my spine. I instinctively started checking if my doors and windows were locked, even though I was hundreds of miles away and in my own home. I asked if there was an investigation going on. If she had been taken to prison that morning when we found her in my cabin. Was I safe in my own home? The manager of the retreat center paused for a moment. "That's the reason I wanted to call you," he said. "That morning when we found her in your cabin, she was dead. The autopsy report confirmed she died from a heroin overdose, probably sometime in the early morning. The images of what went on in my cabin that night flashed through my mind like a scene from a horror film. The distress and psychosis of the woman as she tore apart my cabin. Her eventual death. What could have happened if I hadn't run to the lodge when I did? What was she planning to do to me?" My head was spinning. I hung up the phone and felt a mix of emotions. Sadness for the death of Carrie, who may have been helped had she been found sooner. Terror at the thought of what she planned on doing to me if we had both reached my cabin. Relief knowing it was done and I was safe in my own home. That trip still haunts me to this day. I haven't walked alone in the woods since. Triple Threat Wish. Wishes are a feeling or expressions of a strong desire or hope for something that is not easily attainable. They want something that cannot or probably will not happen. That's how my life goes. I wished for a lot of things and none of them have happened. I've wished for better muscles. I've wished for a girlfriend and other things. But wishes never happen to me, and they never come true either. In other words, my life stinks. It's even worse because of my sister. Instead of my mom waking me up, my sister does. And the way she does it is by jumping on me until my back feels like it's going to break. Did I mention she's only 12 years old and I'm 16? So imagine how I feel every day. And then there are the bullies. Why do those jerks even exist in the first place? I remembered that yesterday, one of those bullies put a baby doll's head in my locker. It freaked me out at first and made me jump in shock and horror. The whole thing made me feel stupid. And even today, as I was sitting in the cafeteria eating lunch by myself, which happens a lot, a guy came up to my table and smiled at me, which was a bit confusing for me. "Hey Jimmy, I wanted to give you something," he said, holding out a sandwich. "You wanted to give me a sandwich?" I asked, confused. Before I could say no, the guy shoved it into my hands. I looked at him and he nodded. I took a bite of it and nearly choked on it. When I opened the sandwich, I noticed there was a living worm in there. I hadn't bitten the worm, but I got the area around it. I almost puked in front of the whole school, and then I excused myself before running out of the cafeteria, still tasting the worm in my mouth. After that, the school day was over, and I decided to walk home. I mean, I didn't have anyone to sit with on the bus, so I just walked. As I was walking, I was thinking about something I could do to turn the tables on everyone who was being a jerk to me. Just then, I stopped in front of a store. It looked brand new but old and abandoned at the same time. "The Weird Wonders," the sign above the door said. Thinking I had a few minutes to spare, I decided to check the place out. As I walked into the store, something flew over my head and I ducked, gasping in shock. I then headed to the front counter and noticed a woman with her back turned to me. There was a black raven sitting on the corner of the front desk looking at me with sharp eyes. "How may I assist you, young man?" the lady asked as she turned around. I was wondering if I could buy something from you." "I've never seen this shop before," I said, grinning nervously. Now that I was face to face with the woman, I noticed how different she looked from me. Her hair was long and was black and gray. One of her eyes was clouded over, so it was all white. She was wearing a dark robe, and she had dark red nails and dark red lips to match. "Well, what would you like to buy?" she asked, grinning mysteriously at me. I looked around the place, and then I noticed a necklace lying on the counter in front of me. The necklace was shaped like a gold medal and had a good-sized green jewel in the middle of it. "How much for that?" I asked, pointing at the necklace. "For you it's free, but hear this warning. Be careful what you wish for, young man," the lady said, grinning mysteriously at me again. Without another word, I took the necklace and put it on before thanking the woman and heading out of her store. I mumbled, "That was weird." I can't believe I had never seen the store before. I kept thinking about it till I realized I would have to see my sister at home. You see, I look after my sister. She would get home after me, and I would have to look after her until Mom got home. I wish my sister would act more mature, I grumbled under my breath. Suddenly, I stopped and looked down. I noticed the green jewel of my new necklace was glowing. It didn't do that in the store, so why was it doing that now? I headed home, and a few minutes later, I got to the house and headed inside and looked around. "Mom!" I shouted, hoping she would be home. Just then, a young lady walked into the hallway. She looked just like my sister in every way. She had red hair and blue eyes and was wearing the same thing my sister was wearing this morning. "Hey Jimmy, how was school today?" she asked, grinning at me. Do I know you?" I asked, looking at the girl confused. "It's my Rachel, you little weirdo," she said, grinning at me. "But the last time you were 12 years old," I said, freaking out. Rachel didn't say anything. She just patted me on the head and then headed off to somewhere else. A few minutes later, Mom showed up, and then she started making dinner. I thought it would be the perfect time to ask her what was going on. "Mom, have you noticed anything weird about Rachel?" I asked to watch her. "What are you talking about, Jimmy?" Mom inquired, her gaze fixed on me. "Well, Mom, Rachel's older than me, and this morning she was younger than me. She's supposed to be 12, not however old she is now," I cried out. "Honey, your sister has always been 21. Did you forget that?" Mom said, grinning. My head began to hurt, and I dashed upstairs to my room, where I sighed softly and stared out the window, thinking. I then rubbed my eyes when I noticed that there was a black raven sitting outside of my window. It looked like the one I saw in the store. I rubbed my eyes, but it was gone before I could see it closer. Then at dinner, I kept looking at my sister, who was chatting with Mom about driving to the mall after school tomorrow. Then I went to my room and got ready for bed. When I heard a throat clearing, I looked up and noticed Rachel was standing there. "Where did you get the necklace from?" she asked, pointing at the new necklace. "From a jewelry store. The person working there let me have it for free," I said, grinning nervously. Then Rachel walked away, and I sat on my bed wondering what was going to happen tomorrow and if I was dreaming this entire thing up. The next morning, when I woke up, I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. But I got up and did everything I was supposed to do to get ready for school. And instead of Mom driving me, Rachel told me she was going to drive me, which freaked me out. Why is this happening? What's going on? I thought. Anyway, Rachel dropped me off at school and I headed inside to my classroom where I was supposed to be learning, but that wasn't happening. Because I knew that the necklace I was wearing had to be connected to what happened. I mean, it had to be because right when I made my dumb wish, the necklace glowed. And of course, I got in trouble because I was paying more attention to my thoughts than the class. As I headed down the hall, I suddenly tripped on something and hit the ground, also breaking my nose in the process. I looked up and saw the football jerk who gave me the worm sandwich yesterday. His name was Scott. "Hey Jimmy, have a nice trip," he said, grinning at me. I stood up, dusting myself off, and I was glaring at him, and he was laughing at me like a tiny baby. "You know what? I wish something horrible would happen to you," I snapped at him. Then my necklace shone brighter, and Scott burst out laughing. "I'm so scared. I can't wait to cream you in gym class," he snapped as he shoved me. Then he walked away, and I looked down at my necklace, realizing what I had done. But I couldn't stop it now, and then I headed to gym class wondering what was going to happen to Scott. It turned out we were playing soccer, and then Scott was going to be a goalie. I wanted to tell him not to, but he wouldn't listen to me. Then it started. Everyone started kicking the ball around and chasing it. Luckily, I was on the sidelines watching. Then it happened. A kid kicked the ball, and when Scott went to grab it, the ball hit him at sonic speed in the face. He cried out in pain and fell to the ground on his knees, and then everyone ran over to him, including me. When the coach got there, Scott took his hands off his face and everyone gasped. Scott's nose was bleeding, and he actually had 2 of his teeth lying on the ground, and his mouth was bleeding a bit. What happened to him? Someone asked. I'll tell you what happened. It's his fault, Scott shouted, pointing at me. But he wasn't playing soccer. How is it his fault? Someone else asked. When we were talking with each other in the hallway, he told me he wished something horrible would happen to me. Scott shouted. But I didn't hit him in the face with the ball, I said, sounding annoyed. Let's just say after that I got in trouble. I was going to have detention for 2 weeks. I didn't know what to do. Then I realized what I had to do. If I bought that necklace from the store, I was going to take it back to the store. So after school, I ran to the store, and when I got there, I stopped short and I nearly fainted. The store wasn't there. In fact, nothing was there. It was just an empty space. What the heck? Where's the store? I cried out in anger. Just then, I heard a loud squawking. When I looked up, I saw that a black raven was sitting on a streetlight and it was holding a piece of paper in its mouth. Then the bird dropped the note in front of me and it fluttered to the ground, and then I bent down and I picked it up. I unfolded the note and my eyes went wide in shock. I told you to be careful what you wish for now you are going to pay for your actions. I looked up and noticed the raven was gone, and I shoved the note into my pocket. I was right, it was the necklace, and then I had an idea of how I could get rid of it. I was thinking maybe if I broke it or got rid of it, all the wishes would come true. I headed to my room when I got home with a hammer, and then I took the necklace off, sitting it on the desk in my room. I was going to break it. If it was a necklace, it should break into a bunch of different pieces and everything should go back to the way it's supposed to go. Then I raised the hammer ready to break it, then I slammed it down, and then I cried out in shock. When I looked down, I realized I had hit my hand, which hurt like hell, and I grabbed it, groaning in agony. I looked down again and noticed the necklace was still okay, and now my hand was messing up. Ugh, I wish my hand was okay, I said out loud. Suddenly, my hand started twitching and then, a few seconds later, it stopped hurting and felt normal. I grabbed the necklace and looked at it, growling under my breath. I had to get rid of this thing. But I couldn't because the store where I got it was closed. I'm sure if I threw it away, it would just show back up in my bedroom. I didn't know what to do. Maybe I could give it away to someone else. I could wish for anything to turn back to normal, and then I could give the necklace to someone else. The day after, I was standing in the hallway of the school and I was listening to kids talking about Scott. They said his nose was broken and that those teeth weren't going to grow back in, but I didn't care about that because it had a plan. I was looking around, wondering who I could give the necklace to, mostly looking at the girls. But then I was wondering if I should tell them that it could make their wishes come true, but then decided not to because they probably wouldn't believe me. Man, I wish someone would die, I grumbled, thinking about the other jerks in my school. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and I noticed the locker had just landed on a kid, and everyone else was screaming in fear. I ran over and noticed the kid was lying under the locker. Their whole face was bleeding, and their eyes were dazed because they were dead, and I gasped in shock. What the hell did I do? I cried out in my thoughts. I then turned around and ran off down the hallway until I got to an empty space where no one was. I slid to the floor, looking at the necklace that I had. I felt tears running down my face. This necklace was running my life. I watched my wishes come true, but it was all twisted in a dark way. Suddenly, a thought filled my head and I smiled. If I could wish for everything I wanted, this idea should work. I wish I had never gotten this necklace, I said, looking down at it. I closed my eyes, breathing heavily, and then I jumped away and realized I was sitting in my bed. I looked around, wondering what happened. I looked down and then noticed the necklace wasn't on me. Then my bedroom door opened and Rachel, who was 12 again, rushed into my room and jumped onto my bed. "Good morning, Jimmy," she shouted, grinning at me. Before she could react, I hugged her so tight she was very confused. But an hour later, I was thinking about what had happened. I then stopped. I noticed the kids who had been crushed by the locker and smiled at them. They were completely okay. But then I noticed something else. It was Scott. He looked okay, but I couldn't pay attention to anything but the necklace he was wearing. It was my necklace, the wishing one. He then walked away and I followed after him, noticing he was heading for the bathroom. When I got in there, he turned around and glared at me with a dark look in his eyes. "Why are you following me, creep?" he snapped at me. I noticed his nose was completely fine and that he had all his teeth, and I looked at the necklace, which was indeed mine. "Dude, where did you get that necklace?" I asked, pointing at it. "Oh, I got it at a store yesterday. It's pretty cool, isn't it?" He grinned. "Look, dude, you don't want to make any wishes with that on," I explained to him. Why not?" Scott asked, sounding concerned. "Because I had that necklace, and when I made wishes it twisted them all, and if you make wishes it's going to twist them all." I was cut off when Scott held up his hand. "Dude, I wish you would shut your mouth," Scott said to me. "But dude, please dash," I was suddenly cut off. I couldn't open my mouth again. I touched my lips and felt something weird on them. I turned around to look at the mirror and realized my lips had been wired shut, and I screamed a muffled scream. I looked at Scott, who looked worried at first, then he smiled. "You know what people say, Jimmy, silence is golden," he said, grinning. Then, without another word, Scott walked out of the bathroom, leaving me to deal with the problem I had now. What I've always been. Shunned from the world, I call the woods my home. I dare not travel out of the forest for fear of the cruelty and hostility civilization has given me every time I show myself. All my life they called me a monster, and the word wounds me. All I want is what anyone wants, to live, to love, and to be loved. But these hopes have been stripped from me, so I instead seek isolation, free from the persecutions of humans. My tattered and ill-fitting garbs are crudely made leather that I created myself. But they suit me fine because out here, alone, I don't have anyone to impress. It has been years since I last tended to my mighty mane. The tragedy of life has eroded any semblance of vanity I may have once had. Whenever I catch a glimpse of my reflection in the water, I slap it, ruining the image that caused so many nightmares. There is nothing I can do to change it, otherwise, I would gladly do so. At night I sit in my makeshift home of mud and rotten logs that I gathered. In this poor excuse for shelter, I huddle around a fire and wish I had someone to share it with. This wish is not different from self-inflicted abuse because there is no one who would love a creature like me. During the day, I forage for food. Leafy greens and berries mostly because I don't eat meat. The animals I share these woods with are like my friends. They do not judge and have grown accustomed to me being here. How long has that been, I cannot say, only that it has been too many winters to count. From time to time people come to my woods and I avoid them the best I can. Despite my size, I am very good at not being seen if I don't want to be. Occasionally people catch a glimpse of me, word of mouth has spread, and I've become an urban legend. An oddity. Another wounding word, but better than most I have been called. When people do enter my territory, I like to watch them and pretend I am like them. One of the pretty ones. The ugly ones. Anything other than the monster that I resemble. This childlike dream of mine died one fateful day as I was eavesdropping on a young couple as they were struggling to set up camp. There was no malicious intent as I spied on them. I was just lonely and wanted to live vicariously and pretend I was like them. It was the woman who saw me first, and she screamed monster as she pointed at me before running away. Her mate followed closely behind. As they ran, I felt embarrassed that I was seen and ashamed of the body I am condemned to live in. I felt this way all my life, but unlike every other moment in my painful existence, this time was different because there was something else behind those emotions. Perhaps for the first time, I felt anger. Anger towards the humans for making me feel that way all my life, and I knew that I had to destroy the source of these feelings. I needed to kill the two who fled at the sight of me. I caught up to the man first. Killing him was easy. I bent low and snatched him by the leg, swinging him at nearby trees before tearing off his head with my clawed hands. Feeling his body break numbed my anger, shame, and embarrassment with something that I had never felt before: satisfaction. Dark urges took hold of me, making me lick his blood off of my claws, and the coppery taste woke up a long dormant part in me, something primal, feral, and cruel. The blood of my victims also killed the last morsel of remorse I harbored for the humans and the way they made me feel all my life. That feeling of satisfaction disappeared as soon as I identified it. The man died too quickly for there to be any real lasting joy from the act of killing him. Thankfully, the woman offered me another chance to savor that feeling. She didn't stand a chance at escape as she ran, but I let her believe that she had won. Denying her escape at the last possible second would be preferable to outright killing her. As she ran, zigzagging through the trees, I nearly laughed at those efforts. As I swiped at her with my clawed hands, I did so almost playfully. Droplets of her mate's blood splattered her back. She panted and begged her God to be spared as she ran, but she wouldn't have screamed if she wanted forgiveness. She wouldn't have run. She wouldn't have been a part of the world that called me a monster. Her terrified screams made me smile as they reached a crescendo as my claws slashed her back, reducing the shirt she wore to ribbons. It was the first time I remember ever having a reason to smile. My mighty hands engulfed the woman and I lifted her off the ground. I turned her around to look at me, and a primal scream ripped its way out of my throat. "You no hurt me again." Her expression was pure terror, and I soaked it all in, but as soon as I saw a shimmer of confusion creep its way on her face, I lifted her high above me and ripped her in half. The shower of blood acted as a baptism. I was reborn by it, cleaned by it, cleaned of being an unwilling outsider, cleansed of being a proverbial punching bag. I became what they always called me. I have become a monster. Eyes on the fence. Traverse City, Michigan, the area is known for its freshwater beaches, vineyards, and wineries. A cousin of ours was coming home from the military. Even though we live in the next state over, we drove there to spend the week catching up and celebrating. When we arrived, half of his entire family was already there having a great time. We all welcomed him home and had a wonderful time that night. We all planned a bunch of things to do the following day, going to a place we heard good things about called Potter's Bakery, visiting F&M Park for the children, and most importantly heading to Bryant Park Beach. We all go to sleep, excited about what the next day has in store. We wake up at 8 a.m., get showered and dressed, make breakfast, and hang out around the house until all the little ones wake up. Around 9 we're all ready. We all drive out, eat and chat, head to the park, and have fun. Then around 11:30 a.m., we head to the beach. We swim, play volleyball, and chill out. I'm lying down in the sand, just soaking in the sun, whilst my younger cousins are burying my feet in the sand giggling. I suddenly feel uneasy. I get that weird feeling of someone's eyes on me. I look all around and I see no one looking at us, yet I still feel this feeling. That's until I look towards the fence that's walled off the beach, and I see this old, patchy, balding, middle-aged man staring at me, with just his eyes and above being visible. We make eye contact for about 7 seconds, then I break it and stand up and storm towards the fence. The man disappears and books it. I prop myself up with my arms on the fence, thinking I'll see him fleeing, but when I look I see no one. The large number of trees and greenery made it way harder to see if anyone was there too. I am disturbed and confused. I don't understand where this creep could have run off to. I return to my group and my concerned younger cousins. When I tell them what happened, they are deeply concerned. We contemplate calling the police or looking for this guy, but we just tell nearby staff and they tell us they'll look around the area. After that, we attempt to move on with our day and enjoy it, but I don't succeed in rubbing it off. An hour or two later, we call it a day at the beach and walk towards the parking lot. I unload our cooler into the trunk and slam it shut. I take a second to stretch before getting in my car, but then on the other side of the parking lot, in a rusty brown old truck, I see him. I charged towards the truck and yelled, but he took off. I couldn't get his license plate and we weren't going to try and race against him to get it, so I accepted my loss and headed back to the house. It was around 2 a.m. and I was woken up by the honking of a horn from the street. I make my way to the living room and my uncle is already there by the window. He looks at me and says it's that prick from the beach, same brown truck. At this point, I am sick of this stalker. I and my uncle grab a golf club and a baseball bat, and we charge out and swing on the truck from the lawn's perimeter. I hit and make a dent in his hood, and my uncle goes and smashes his backside blinker. The man screams something from inside his car and drives off again. This time I do get a good look at his license plate, and this POS has taped over a few characters. We hoped this would send a big enough message to this guy for him to leave us alone, and thankfully, it did. We enjoyed the next 5 days of hanging out, and after 2 days of hitting his truck, I wasn't on edge anymore. But I would see him once more before our trip was over. We had packed up, loaded everything in our car, and said our goodbyes. We were about an hour into our drive, far from Traverse City. I'm in the passenger seat, half asleep, falling in and out of consciousness. We pass by this commercial area, McDonald's, Burger King, Arby's, and stuff like that for grabbing food on the go. But as we passed by, in the parking lot of the McDonald's, I saw the same truck, brown and rusty, dented and blinker broken, but now with tape over it. This shakes me up. I try and wake myself up a bit more to look, but we've already passed by. I still don't know if that was just some half-asleep daydream or if he was there, but I was tired of dealing with that man, so I rested my head back on my shoulder and drifted back to sleep. Number 13. We live in a small house, the tiniest house of them all. The number 13 is plastered on the side of the house. We had been looking for the perfect house for a long while now. 3 years to be exact. One day I came across this small, nice-looking house and decided that this was the one. Most people would think, oh no, a house with the number 13 on it must be cursed. I don't really believe in ghosts, ghouls, witches, and that sort of thing. I asked my wife what she thought, and she smiled at me and said, "We've finally found the perfect house, Elias." After a few years of living in the house, weird things started to happen. Things like banging from the attic, the feeling of someone standing behind you, and footsteps could occasionally be heard. Like I said, I don't believe in this stuff, so I shrugged them off, blaming them on our imagination, but my wife was beginning to worry. One day, while lying in bed, Diana turned to me and said, "Elias, please, I don't feel safe in this house. Too many coincidences have happened and we can't keep shrugging them off anymore." I kissed her hand and said, "Don't worry, there is nothing out there. Your imagination is just getting the better of you." She withdrew her hand and replied, "No, I mean it. Something is going on." I told her to get some sleep and that I would protect her. I held her in my arms until I heard her soothing breath, telling me she had finally gone to sleep. I stayed up a little while longer listening to her breathing. It was very calming. I awoke suddenly. From what? I don't know. I lay facing away from the door and staring at the wall. I suddenly got this strange feeling like someone was standing behind me, watching me like a beast. It freaked me a little bit out until I finally got a hold of myself and looked around. Nothing. I closed my eyes, thinking it was only my imagination. I soon drifted off to sleep. I jolted awake. I looked at my sleeping wife. I told myself I just had a bad dream and laid down again. Crash. I heard from downstairs. My wife woke up and told me that the end was near. "What do you mean?" I asked her. She only looked at me with eyes wide open. I figured she was terrified, so I told her I would go down and check and that she should stay there. She didn't reply. She just lay there, staring at me. I went out of our room. I carefully opened the door. No one was there, just a dark, lonely hallway. Although I'm a non-believer, I started praying to God in my head. "Please God, if you're out there, don't let this be the day I die." I spotted a baseball bat in the corner at the far end of the hallway, illuminated by the moonlight. I grabbed it and started making my way down the stairs soundlessly. There was still no one there. I knew that if I said anything I would probably alert the burglars, so I was silent as a mouse. I opened the door to the living room quietly. Still no sign of anyone. I continued to the kitchen. That's when I saw it. The most horrible sight I have ever seen. A woman was standing in the kitchen with a huge grin on her face and razor-sharp teeth, like a beast. She ran towards me, opening her mouth. I awoke with a fright. I looked over to my left and there she was. My beautiful wife was sleeping. I thought to myself, "Elias, you're such a fool. Of course, it was only a dream." I looked at the clock. It read 3 a.m. I closed my eyes again and fell asleep. When I woke up, the clock read 5 a.m. I found the bed empty. She's probably just gone to the bathroom, I told myself. I was thirsty, so I decided to get up and put my clothes on. When I opened the bedroom door, I could hear my wife calling my name from downstairs. Oh, she is downstairs. I thought to myself. As I began to walk, I was pulled to the side by my wife. She put her hand over my mouth so I couldn't make a sound. "Shoo," she said, "I hear it too." Real life chase. It was 2023 around March or April. I and my friends decided it would be a good idea to cherry knock, knocking on people's doors and running away, but then it escalated and we ended up buying eggs. Eventually, we found a house that we decided to sell. We were a group of 4, 2 of us would egg the house and 2 would run. I was one to egg the house with my friend Gabby. We egged the house and got away pretty successfully. Then we moved on to our second house and Paige and Lacey didn't want to do it, so me and Gabby did it again. This time we were running uphill and Gabby, being stupid, stopped midway, and a man in his 20s, blonde, scratchy beard and about 5'10" was behind her. I told her to hurry up and we ran and he chased us. My friends knew their way around this end of the area, but I had no clue, so I stayed behind them. We hid behind a wall, but it's tricky to explain. The wall faces the houses and you can park your cars behind the wall. We ran to where this place was and I tried to hop a fence, but it was too tall, so we hid behind the wall. My stupid friend Lacey stepped in those marble stones people put in their front garden, and the man must have heard, but another voice was speaking to him. They started shouting out, "We can fucking hear you, are not stupid." So I decided I'd be smart and split up from them. I crouched against the wall and then tried to go up the stairs, thinking that they'd go to where Lacey made the noise. These dumb idiots came down the stairs as I went up them and they started cussing me out. Rightfully so. But I made out I had just come out of my house and was going to meet my friend. They showed me a picture of my outfit on the Ring doorbell, but you couldn't see my face really. I forgot to mention, when we were buying the eggs we bought a Pepsi and made out we were making omelets. I had it in my hand, so I just carried on walking, and then he tried to grab me, so I dashed it in his face and sprinted, but running in Air Forces back down a hill is hard. Plus I didn't know where I was at all because I'd never been here before. So I just jumped into a bush when I got around the corner. This bush had a house behind it and I saw them run past me down the street, so I ran the opposite way. I heard them call out to each other saying I was over there, and I was actually about to piss myself because I'm 15 and they're grown men. And being lost, I ran back to the first house I egged like an idiot. This house is in a cul-de-sac though, and there's a wall that curves, so I followed the wall, hiding behind the parked cars. Because I stuck to the wall, I didn't realize there was an alleyway that would have led to the shop I bought the eggs from. Now I'm sitting behind this car and a man I've never seen before runs past, and I know I have to move, but I was shitting myself. Then he came out of the alleyway and he saw me, of course. Then he ran up to me and dragged me up by my shirt and he started punching me in the face. He was saying something, but it was in a foreign language and I had no clue. Then he got me in a headlock and I was screaming out he's gonna rape me over and over, and then I threw my head back, hitting him in the nose, and he let go, but my stupid coat let him grab the hood and pull me back. But then a few people started coming out of their houses and he was ignoring everybody, and these weirdos didn't even help me. Then his wife opened the door and he was trying to get me inside, and I actually froze. Then I elbowed him and he let go, and then he slammed me down onto these stone slabs he used for stairs or whatever it was. Then a man came over and grabbed gum off me, and I could hear my friends shouting my name, but I didn't say anything because I was too scared. Whilst the men were talking, I called my mom and told her what happened. She asked me where I was, but I didn't know. I tried to run and he slammed me back down onto the stone thing. Then my friends ran down the street when they found me, and they started cussing him out because I had cuts and bruises on my face and neck. Then I tried to run again, but he did the same slamming me down thing, and my friends started cussing him out. Then they rang my mom because we were close like that and they knew the area. The man let me go after the other man spoke to me and told me it was wrong to egg houses, and then the foreign man let me go after I said sorry, and then my mom pulled up at the co-op near the man's house, and then she went ballistic and started driving around looking for his house. She was saying that egging his house doesn't give him the right to touch me and I get it karma, but I literally went to the hospital thinking I had a concussion. Then my mom found the street and me and Gabby pointed it out. Lacey and Paige had left because it was around 11 p.m. on the weekend. Then I can't really say what my mom did but police were called and we had to go. Nothing has been said to us about it since. The moral of the story is don't be stupid.